Good morning and welcome. I'm Chris Stewart. I'll be your MC this morning. I just ask that you silence your phones. We're going to move through the agenda quickly this morning. We've got 5 speakers. I know you see 4 on the podium, but we've got 1 additional speaker, a BBG board member that will hopefully join us towards the end of the presentation and provide some remarks. Within a couple of days, there's no need to take notes. The presentation you see today, as well as the video, will be posted in the next couple of days on the BBG website, so you don't have to furiously write everything down that the speakers are saying today. We're pleased to be partnered with the Broadcasting Board of Governors as we continue our monthly series on topical research findings from various markets around the world. This effort is in support of BBG's mission to inform, engage, and connect people around the world in support of freedom and democracy. Today we will look at findings from Vietnam. Our next event in January will focus on Russia. We're still trying to nail down details. The data just came in. We're also trying to balance and ensure that we don't schedule it in the event of a government shutdown. Hopefully the budget deal yesterday got us through that. We won't have a shutdown in January. The findings today are going to focus both on our Gallup World Poll, which is a study in 165 countries around the world, as well as some qualitative and quantitative research from Vietnam that BBG's conducted with Gallup. Vietnam's one of the more interesting countries. I happen to have a huge affinity for Vietnam. I actually was the first individual to conduct research in Vietnam after the Vietnam War. It took me about a year to get approval out of the Office of Foreign Assets Control back in '92, and did work really looking at the attitudes and opinions post the Vietnam War. So it's a country that I've followed, spent a lot of time on the ground over the years, and I hope you'll enjoy the findings we have today. Our first speaker today is the Director of Strategy, Mr. Bruce Sherman. He's recently visited Vietnam and is going to be providing some opening remarks for us and some comments from his just recent visit on the ground. Bruce?
Thank you, Chris. This will be very brief because it's a big presentation that our researchers and BBG and Gallup have labored long on, and I want you to be able to see that and then have time for questions. First, thanks, Chris, and I want to thank all of you for coming. We do webcast, record these for playback later, so there's a broader audience than those of us here in the room. I want to mention just again that we at BBG believe strongly in doing what we can to share our research information with the broader public. The research we do, of course, is taxpayer funded because we are a federal entity, and we want to do our part to provide information to the public about how we see the markets that we operate in, the countries that we're targeting with our broadcast around the world. Vietnam being a country that is of particular interest to us because of press freedom issues there. The BBG is about supporting free, open, democratic societies through free expression and free press, and therefore we pay a lot of attention to Vietnam. As Chris noted, I was just there on the occasion of the Asia Pacific Broadcasting Union meeting. Several colleagues from Voice America, Radio Free Asia joined me there, and I found the country to be vibrant, very dynamic, incredibly young, hard-charging, looking ahead to the future. And at the same time, we know that for the purposes of communicating there are any number of restrictions with respect to the free flow of information. So it's a challenging environment that the presentation will go into today. I want to acknowledge here with us colleagues from our organization, in addition to Betsy Henderson, who's the Research Director at Radio Free Asia and will be presenting. Steve Reddish, Executive Editor of Voice America, is here. Chris Deckard, who heads the Commerce Service at Voice America, is here. And colleagues of mine from Strategy and Development, Alan Heil, who was the Deputy Director of Voice America for a number of years, has joined us today. So welcome to them, welcome to all of you, and we look forward to a very good presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. Our first presenter this morning, I'm not going to run through bios this morning just in the interest of time because we have a lot of material to get through. You've got hard copies with you on people's background. But our first speaker this morning is Mrs. Dawn Royal, a senior methodologist here at Gallup, and has been involved in our Vietnam research with BBG, but she's also going to be sharing with you some of the findings from our Gallup World Poll from Vietnam. So please join me in welcoming Dawn Royal.
Thanks, Chris. I'm going to keep my piece pretty brief and give you just the tiniest snapshot of what we have from the World Poll. As Chris noted, Gallup does the World Poll in about 160 countries, at least 160 countries every year since it started in 2006. And Vietnam was one of those inaugural countries that we did at the time. I'm going to go over this methodology a little bit because it is the same methodology that we use for the BBG study as well. And there are some challenges with doing interviews in Vietnam, and I kind of want to make sure that everybody understands that as we go into our data. We've done 8 national surveys in Vietnam on the World Poll since 2006, 1 each year, and then we did 2 back in 2012. It's nationally representative of the 57 million Vietnamese age 15 or older. It's an interesting country to try to interview in. As you can see, it's a long S-shaped country. And because we do these studies in person, paper and pencil interviews, we have to get interviewers to all these locations. And there are quite a few remote and difficult to reach locations in Vietnam. So that is one of our challenges with trying to do interviewing there. And the World Poll does 1,000 interviews a year. And you'll see when we get BBG, we do quite a few more interviews than that, and they're targeted. Some of the challenges beyond just the length of the country are really the terrain, the mountainous terrain, far-flung provinces. We have interviewers that are needing to walk up to 20 kilometers just to get to a village or to a different location, and sometimes they're having to do multiple locations in a single day. We also have some weather issues. Flooding is prominent in the country, so we have to time our interviewing throughout the country, so when we're not quite hitting those horrible floods, and you can see some of the pictures there of what our interviewers have had to do, hire mountain bikes to go, over the terrain, 4-hour bus rides to get to a single location to do, 8 interviews. So it is a challenging country, so we're proud of the data that we get out of there. Just a few quick snapshots of some of the changing attitudes that are going on in Vietnam. There's a question Gallup asks on all of our World Poll studies, all the countries we do, and it's about your life perspective. Where do you stand? If you're standing at the bottom of a ladder and the ladder has 10 rungs, where are you in your life right now? And you can see the trend. The lighter green is perceptions of my life today, and they're right around that 5.3 range and have been since we started measuring. But the darker green line is where you see your life being 5 years from now. So as Bruce noted, there's a lot of hope for the future. People are a whole rung and a half up, or see themselves being there 5 years from now from where they are right now. Even more encouraging is if you look at it by age. The lighter the lines go, the younger the people are. And you can see that the youth have even more hope for the future, and adds to that vibrancy in the community that Bruce was mentioning. Some other changing attitudes you'll see, we asked some questions about freedom, perceptions of freedom. As we know, it's not actually an open and free media environment, but we asked perceptions of how free individuals feel they are, how free they feel the media is in the country. And you can see that over time, there were some dips in 2011 on a number of these measures, particularly on confidence in the national government, which is still fairly high. Kind of came back up, as well as freedom in your life is the lighter bar in the middle. And again, after that dip, we're coming back up and stabilizing where earlier perceptions were. And again, media freedom, not quite up where personal freedom is, but we are seeing some improvements in that over recent years as well. Excuse me. Another interesting question that I thought would be fun to share with you is kind of a question that talks about stability of the country, or perceived stability. We asked people how likely they would be to leave the country that they're in and just permanently move somewhere else. And you can see back when we first started asking this in 2006, quite a high proportion of the youth were saying, I'm getting out of Dodge, or getting out of Vietnam. And that really has dropped off. So it has dropped off for all ages, and the youth are still more likely to want to get out of Dodge, even though they may not actually leave. But that has dropped off quite a bit. What does that mean? It means that you've got really a stable community of people that we can reach out to that are not trying to leave and churn over the country. There's also some other positive news out there. Entrepreneurial spirit is out there and growing. You can see even just the 3-year trend in perceptions of the community being a good place to start a business, having business owners being good role models for youth. And we ask a question if people would rather risk owning their own business as opposed to working for somebody else. And you can see significant increases over the past few years in all 3 of those measures, which really bodes well for a strong future, and how can we all play a role in that. I'm going to turn it now over back to Betsy Henderson, Research Director at RFA.
Thank you, Dawn. Let's get a little background on our national survey. It's, as Dawn said, the methodology is quite similar to the World Poll. Face-to-face interviews with 3,018 randomly selected adults, 15 and up. It covered 50 of the 63 provinces and municipalities, and it was nationally representative, as the World Poll is, of 57 million Vietnamese. About 15% of the population was not covered in this because of unsafe or extremely remote areas, but still 85% were covered, which is considered nationally representative. These were conducted November 2012 to February 2013. Now, the World Poll is very focused on opinions. We got really down into the weeds on media use. We have a lot of detailed questions on media use. The average length of the completed questionnaires was about 30 minutes. Okay, so the snapshot of media use is here, showing an urban-rural split. And I think the big takeaway on this is television, obviously, is just everybody has it in their home. And it doesn't matter whether you're in the countryside or whether you're in the city, that you've got television in your home. And mobile phone ownership is essentially the same, whether you're in the city or the countryside. In fact, basically the gap between rural and urban Vietnam on media is basically closed except for home internet access, where you see a 10-point difference. Moving along to radio, you can see that the households are 22%, but use is higher than that. Part of that is use outside the home. Young, urban, educated people are somewhat more likely to use the radio. And FM reaches 81% of folks who listen to the radio, and it's probably higher than that because there was a little confusion about wave bands. Interestingly, 54% of the regular radio audience also listens on their mobile phone. That includes cell phones that have a radio actually installed on the phone, probably an FM radio, and also satellite receiver, listening to radio and satellite receiver. Shortwave and AM use are very low, but the Voice of Vietnam continues to broadcast 20 hours daily on multiple shortwave frequencies, and AM is still used. Okay, on to cable and satellite TV. So how do people get the signals? Still, antenna use is highest, but you see satellite dishes are expanding, and you see that satellite is more common in rural areas than cities. Cable is more common in cities than the countryside. Significantly, in 2010, only 21% of households had a dish. Now, that's from the BBG National Survey in 2010. We asked about what satellites they connect to, and the 3 top providers are all domestic providers. So, and their dishes are quite small, 1 meter or less, almost all of them. And that is significant because of the ability to reach Vietnamese audiences for folks outside. Now I'm going to turn it over to Jingling Elliott, who has done a much more in-depth study on satellite and paid TV.
Thank you, Betsy. Before we dive into the finding results, I would like to clarify that the study that we do here is a qualitative study. It's not a nationally representative study like the one that Betsy just mentioned. However, it does provide context into the findings. It tells you the what's and how's of the media consumption in Vietnam. As Betsy and Don has mentioned, that Vietnam has a very vibrant multi-channel television market, and basically it has two main platforms, cable television and direct-to-home satellite. The majority of the satellite owners, they have what we call illegal dishes. What that means is that any ordinary consumers, they can just go to the street or the store to buy unbranded dish, and what they do is that they can install that themselves or have a professional installer to come install it, and they will receive the free-to-air Vietnamese television programs from Vinsat 1 and 2, and about less than 18% of them, they are the people who have what we call bouquet packages that has both domestic and international programs. The third platform that's really gaining its momentum is what we call Internet Protocol Television. What that means is that the television signals coming to the household through internet connections. Vietnam multi-channels is very vibrant, and it's very similar to some of the markets in Southeastern countries, such as Burma and Cambodia, where you have international channels that can be directly beamed into the households. It's very different from China, where international channels can only be viewed in expat communities or business districts or hotels that cater to foreign visitors. You have all kinds of international channels, such as Discovery or CNN International. So this is what it looks like if you had put numbers to the pay market in Vietnam. About 1/3 of the pay TV households have satellite. About 1 out of 5 have cable television. And as I mentioned before, the majority of the satellite dishes, they are small, either 1 meter or smaller. And about 82% of them are the people who have quote-unquote illegal dish satellites. They get the free domestic channels only. And about 20% of them, they pay a fee to get the international package. With all these control from the Vietnamese government, it makes it very difficult for international broadcasters to go inside of Vietnam. So it got us to think, we need to do a study to explore what are the opportunities out there for international broadcasters such as BBG. We want to find out what is the landscape of pay TV in Vietnam, and some of the specific questions we try to find out was, are people really interested in international programming, and what are the ways that what are tangible ways for us to reach these television viewers in Vietnam? Would having subtitles or dubbing make it more interesting and more attractive for the viewers? And specifically for satellite technology, is it technologically possible to adjust the satellite equipment to receive the international programs that people cannot receive? Are consumers willing to do so as well? So what we did was that we went and conducted 33 in-depth interviews and in-home observations among cable, satellite, and IPTV consumers, installers, and managers. We went to 3 cities, Hanoi, Da Nang, and Ho Chi Minh cities, and we also went to 3 provinces in the north and south and central south. When I was in the field, a lot of the observations I saw really reminded me of the television market when I was growing up in Taiwan in the 60s and 70s. People may not have a lot of possessions, but television is such an important form of entertainment for them. So people may have a small, tiny house. They may not have furniture, but definitely have a color television in there. And this is some of the pictures I'm going to share with you. This is a household we went to in Hanoi. It's a cable household, and it's actually a pretty nice room. However, when we went there were only 2 pieces of furniture. This sort of entertainment set you see, and a bed. There are no chairs, no end table, no lamp. So when we walk into the house, we all had to sit on the floor. And one thing I noticed is that there's no set-top box. I don't know about you. I worked for a cable operator for a few years. Part of my orientation is that I had to ride on the service truck with the installers and technicians to go to people's household to make sure there are no theft of cable signal. So when I saw this, that went through my head and thinking, something's not right. So I went to the back of the television, and all I saw was this coaxial cable line hooking up to something outside. So I asked the participant to show me where his set-top box is. So we went downstairs, went a couple households down, and saw this on the telephone post. That's his set-top box, apparently shared with, 20 more households. So it means that, people, they may not have a lot, but they do whatever they can to get their television signals. And the next one is even more interesting. It's in Hanoi. Ho Chi Minh City. It's a tiny house with only one room inside. As you can see, he has all kinds of junk outside. When you go inside, everything he has in that room, his bed, his moped, his kitchen, his bathroom, everything in there. And he also has a big television in there. So this basically saying people really enjoy television entertainment in Vietnam. And we were able to talk to a few IPTV customers, and these are mainly people who are in a higher bracket of economic status. Reason for that is because IPTV is a little bit more expensive. The cost is about $40 to $70 US for installation, and monthly fee is about $3 to $7. And not a lot of people have this technology in their household. However, this particular platform has its own advantage over cable and satellite because all of the IPTV providers are also telecom providers, so they can bundle the service together, make it a lot more attractive and convenient for the consumers. And it's available both in rural and urban areas. IPTV may not be widespread yet, but as Betsy and Don mentioned, as internet penetration start to grow, you will be able to see that IPTV will become more popular in Vietnam. And like I mentioned, one of the main goals for us to do the project was that we want to see how willing are people to rotate their satellite dish to aim to the satellite to receive the international channels, and how willing are they to also to tune their receivers. We found out no, people absolutely are not interested in doing so. They just want to be a couch potato. They are very happy with either the domestic channels they have or the international channels they have. And also at the same time, people, they just don't feel comfortable or confident to do anything technology-wise. They feel like if they do anything, they may lose the signal. So that's one thing we have found, that people, they're just happy with what they have. The other thing we looked into was if subtitles or dubbing will make the international programming more attractive. What we found was that for some of the channels, especially for movies and lifestyle kind of channels, they usually have subtitles and on all of their programs. But some channels have only some of their programs that will have subtitles, such as MTV and TV Sang Monde Asi. Not all of their programs have subtitles. And when we talk about the international programs in Vietnam, we absolutely have to talk about Decision 20. Decision 20 is a law that's passed by the Vietnamese government in March 2011, and it didn't really take effect until May 2013 when we were in the field. What it does is that it requires international channels to have its content translated, subtitled, and also hired an internal editor from the Vietnamese government. And it's just another way for the Vietnamese government to have a tighter control of the content and the market. However, at the same time, it also expands the international channels, allows people who don't necessarily understand English or French to watch international channels. When this rule first came out, it has quite a lot of controversies. Back in May and June of this year, when it first happened, a lot of the movies or lifestyle channels, they actually did go ahead and apply for the license. But many of the international channel news, they basically just refused because can you imagine the kind of logistic nightmare and financial burden these channels will have to bear? And so there were lots of negative publicity for the Vietnamese government and lots of protests from the embassy. So finally, after a few months, the government, they decided, okay, international news channel will be exempted from the requirement. However, there's lots of back and forth. That ruling also has changed in the past few months. As late as October of this year, CNN decided that it will go ahead and acquire its editing license to allow it to continue to operate in Vietnam. So with all these findings we have, basically tells us two things. One is that the pay TV market is very dynamic and robust in Vietnam. And as international broadcasters such as BBG, we really have to stay on top of everything to make necessary adjustment. And also, if you make the content easier to understand for the viewers, there is a possibility of increasing the international television viewership. Next, I'm going to move on to Betsy.
Hopping up and down again. This is just a recap of the earlier slide that I showed, basically showing a flat mobile ownership across urban and rural areas, but again, the gap in internet household. We're going to look a little more closely at digital media. Clearly, the mobile has grown dramatically since 2008. This is from World Poll data showing household ownership of mobile phones. BBG's surveys have shown the same thing. Personal ownership of mobile phones also has gone up dramatically. What you see here is a breakdown of who actually owns, what's the percentage ownership among different demographic segments. And I think the takeaway from this is basically pretty much people have these phones, except if you're over 55 and have no formal education, in which case only about a half of you have it. You can see that more than a quarter of those phones are web capable, which means that 1 in 5 Vietnamese has a web capable phone. Of course, as in all phones, they're more likely to be owned by people under 25. 51% of those web capable phones are Nokia phones, which is the most popular brand. On mobile, they're not, in addition to the internet, they're doing all sorts of things on their phones, and the educated folks and the youth are really pushing that usage forward. The big cleavages in Vietnam are not actually between urban and rural. Among people who use their phones, they're doing pretty much what people in urban areas are doing, maybe a little bit more internet among city people. But what you see here is that if you look at that column 55 plus and you look at that column 15 to 24, you see a big gap in what people are doing on their phones. And these are all phone users who've used their phone in the last week. You also see a pretty big gap between the high school folks and the post-high school folks, especially for more interactive stuff like accessing social media. Looking at social media, it's a great way to interface with the Vietnamese. In spite of the fact that Facebook is blocked, it is still used by 15% of the population, and in fact, 65% of folks who've used social networking sites. So it's hugely popular and a great way to reach people. Google Plus is also popular. It's a little difficult to pick apart how much of that is social media and how much is just that Google is so popular in Vietnam. So about a quarter of Vietnamese adult population is using social media weekly, and about 3/4 of urban young people. Okay, to internet itself, you can see more, unlike mobile, you see a big difference in different demographic segments, with people with no formal education and older people really using it very, very rarely, compared to people with post-high school or this 15 to 24 group, which is a huge chunk of it, is using the internet in the past week. And they're not using it, they're not sort of making their way to a cafe or their schools. Some people, of course, are, but the overwhelmingly #1 place where people use the web is at home or on mobile devices. Looking at what they're doing on the web, it's a similar kind of picture to mobile. The big cleavages are between the younger folks and those, we even just took it to 35 plus on this chart, and you can see there's a big difference in what they're doing on the web, as well as the high school folks and post-high school folks. Again, it's the educated and the young. Okay, we're highlighting a couple things. Again, commenting on a blog, we consider a very significant activity, of course. There's been a lot of not great stuff going on with bloggers in Vietnam over the last year, but clearly it's a educated activity more than a less educated activity. Top internet sites visited, Google is the #1 site in Vietnam. And that is extremely important to folks who want to communicate with a Vietnamese audience, because not only Google displays things that are banned or censored. So our qualitative work suggests that it's a critical way that people find out more about what's going on. Now, once they find out that there's information about something, they still have to get around blocking, and they still have to get around other barriers, but it is a critical tool that people use. English is only used by about 12% of web users in Vietnam. Okay, again, Google is hugely important. News in Vietnam. Okay, when you're talking about media use, not just in general for entertainment, but for news, not surprisingly, TV is the dominant source. The second source is word of mouth, people. How do you get your news? These people have gotten news from these sources in the last week. SMS news, it's a little hard to say what exactly they mean by news when they're answering this question. It could be weather reports, it could be sports news. It may not be what we think of as hard news. Big headline, I guess, is that internet use in general has outstripped radio for news. Not surprisingly, when you ask we have an unprompted question that I absolutely love, which is, what's your top source of news? And we just leave it completely open-ended. And what comes out the other end is unprompted. TV stations are the top, and again, we see Google as the #1 non-television source for news for Vietnamese people. So what are they interested in? We ask them about various topics and see their level of interest. And in this chart, we picked apart, are young people interested in different things than older people? I think in general, everyone likes to talk about the weather. I think yesterday we all liked to talk about the weather. 2 days ago we were talking about the weather. Everybody likes to talk about the weather. So what? On the other hand, things like healthcare are more interesting to older people than younger people. That's kind of intuitive. And things like IT are more interesting to younger people than older people. So you see the arrows going in different directions. However, one thing I wanted to point out that is a standout is the attention to environmental issues, because this is something that's a little bit different than what we've seen in other countries, and I think it's noteworthy in terms of important issues that are important to the folks there and a way to connect. There's a much higher level of interest in environmental issues in Vietnam than in other countries. And this is consistently shown in another of my favorite questions, which is the unprompted question about what are the 3 biggest problems in Vietnam today? What are the biggest problems in Vietnam today? So environment is tied for #1 with Chinese territorial issues. Now these things float around a little bit. If we ask the question today, there might be a different response. There might not be a different response. But you can see that the environment and Chinese territorial issues are consistently of interest. And I think this is important because if you look at other places in Southeast Asia, you'll see more about poverty and crime, which of course is there too. But Vietnam seems to have maybe jumped up to a different level of interest in things that are beyond just basic scrapping, getting by kind of issues. So a few closing thoughts. Obviously, Vietnam is changing very rapidly in attitudes, their socioeconomic change, and in their media use. Now, in the appendix, Dawn didn't advertise it, but there are a lot of interesting world poll questions that are in the appendix. So we have a lot of good data in this partnership with Gallup on what people are thinking in Vietnam. You notice that I didn't say changes in media freedom, because I don't think that that is an area that's changing quite as quickly, unfortunately. And some of the new decrees, including the one that Jingling mentioned, but others, have made it more difficult for bloggers and people and journalists. Traditional media remains dominant, but new media is really pushing forward fast with young people and those with the most education. And as they continue, they're not going to be using new media less. They're only going to be using it more. As I said before, the urban-rural divide is really closing on a lot of things, including new media, although that's a little bit slower. Internet has overtaken radio as a key source. Of course, the internet is blocked, so that is a challenge for some people who are looking for censored information. Google is a critical tool for folks who want to get uncensored information, as well as information in general. So how do you reach Vietnamese people? Well, one of the things you consider is some of the opinion questions and reach them with stuff that's interesting to them. That's a little bit of a no-brainer, but it's important. Take a close look at new media and look at engagement and sharing. Facebook, although blocked, is widely used, and new media offers all kinds of opportunity for sharing information. Finally, optimizing and finding out ways to optimize your placement on searches, especially Google search. And I'm going to hand it back over to Bruce for some closing remarks.
So I just wanted to mention a couple of very quick things, just to underscore what Betsy was saying. We at the BBG believe it's very important to combine an understanding of what's on people's minds as well as the media they're using, which is why in these presentations now, we include a strong battery of attitudinal findings from the Gallup World Poll. And you can see, I think, the benefit of doing that in looking at this presentation today. As Betsy was just saying, how do we communicate with people effectively? We communicate with them on matters that matter to them. And so we have asked questions about what do they want to see in the programming that we produce, or programming in media, but also what are the most important problems facing the country. And for us, strategically, one significant takeaway is that in addition to the news of the day, which we in international broadcasting see as a strong suit, covering the news of the day, it's also true that there are any number of content areas, content verticals we call them, environment is one of those, that might not figure in the news of the day, but is on people's minds. Now, of course, if there's an environmental disaster, it will figure in the news. But there are things that go on day to day that matter to people that we can produce content around to connect with audiences that will diverge a bit from the path that we typically follow of just staying on the political news of the moment. So that's an important thing for us strategically. And I just want to underscore that when you visit the country, you visit Vietnam, as I mentioned before that I did in October, and Chris mentioned, of course, his experience there, and our researchers have been there. The findings that you see presented in this presentation today are borne out by just firsthand observation. An incredibly young population, incredibly interested in their future, hard-charging, moving forward. So when you go and visit and you think about those people on scooters riding around Hanoi or wherever you happen to be, what is it that matters to them? How do we connect with them? And that's what we're obviously interested in trying to determine what we can do, and that's the purpose of our research. We believe strongly that in order to connect with audiences around the world, we have to understand them, and we have to understand the markets they're in, which is, of course, why we have a very robust research program. So with that, I'll just end my closing remarks, and Chris, introduce Michael.
Let's give a nice round of applause to our panelists. We're fortunate to have with us this morning a board member from the Broadcasting Board of Governors. For those of you who don't know what the Broadcasting Board of Governors is, it's both the name of the independent federal agency that oversees all U.S. civilian international media and the name of the board that governs those broadcasts. The board is composed of 9 members with expertise in the fields of mass communication, broadcast media, or international affairs. 8 members are appointed by the President and confirmed by the Senate. The 9th, the Secretary of State, serves as ex officio. With us here this morning is Mr. Michael Meehan, who after 23 years of work in the U.S. Congress, congressional and presidential campaigns, has for the past 6 years built a successful communications strategy and public relations firm, Venn Squared Communications. As President and CEO, Meehan's firm provides strategic communications for dozens of Fortune 500 companies, foundations, trade associations, and political and issue campaigns. On Capitol Hill, Meehan has served in senior roles for U.S. Senators John Kerry, Barbara Boxer, Maria Cantwell, and former Senate Majority Leader Tom Daschle, as well as Congressman Vic Fazio. He serves as a member of the Advisory Committee and the Special Committee on the Future of Shortwave Broadcasting for the BBG. He was also the head of polling for the Democratic Party. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Michael Meehan.
Thanks so much. Thanks for coming out this morning. I just wanted to quickly say thank you all for your hard work on this. It's vital for us on the board as we're trying to set policy on priorities and strategic priorities to have this kind of research. We have this great partnership with Gallup, and we really, you know, from where I sit, we spend far too little much of our resources on research. But, you know, in these dwindling budget days, it's been a struggle to keep the program going that we have going. But a critically important part of the world for us on the board. I've got about 6 new board members who just came on in late summer, early fall, so there's a little bit of a learning curve there. But this is the kind of information and resources that we need to help the board set policy on where we prioritize the 100 countries that we serve in the 61 languages that we work in. So this is very helpful, useful. You know, the part of the ethos of the board is to be very transparent about how we spend the taxpayers' money, and this is why we do events like this, to have people come in and see the research. We make it public. You know, we have a very open source mentality about you know, everybody in the room here can contribute to us being smarter and wiser and being more efficient with the resources that we have. So thank you all for being here, and hopefully there'll be some really hard questions for the panel so I can learn a thing or two. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Michael. We've got some time for questions, so we've got mics around the room. Just if you raise your hand and introduce yourself and the organization you're from and ask your question.
Hi, I'm Steve Crabtree from Gallup. Thank you all for your presentation. Hi, Betsy. Good to see you. I'm really surprised by the frequency with which web users in Vietnam use Google. I think it was something like 90% of web users use Google. So I'm wondering if you could say a little bit more about attempts to block Google. Are the search results themselves blocked? And a little bit about you know, BBG's efforts towards search optimization, since that seems to be so important.
Google.vn is not blocked. No, it's not blocked. And it is, as you saw, widely used. In terms of search optimization, I'm probably not the person to ask about that. Our web tech folks are making sure that our stuff has the meta tags and whatever, so it bumps up there, but it's certainly an effort that people are actively engaged in. Did I answer your question, Steve?
Yeah. If there's someone from our group that would want to answer the question about optimization search, that would be great. If there's anybody here in the crowd who'd like to speak to that, please do. Otherwise, we can follow up with you on that.
You know you're in trouble when I'm the most knowledgeable about this, but in the room, that's just a statement of the room, I guess. But yeah, one of my priorities, I've been on the board 3.5 years, and you know, one of our priorities has been to help transition some resources. You know, the board has a communications platform agnostic position. What's going to work? You know, and what's the best option? So the one area that we have grown the enterprise has been in the anti-circumvention effort. We've been able. It was about $1.5 million we spent a year in 2010. In the past year, we've raised this effort to about $10 or $12 million. We've been leveraging that. So that's been products, and I'm sort of can't wait to get with our technicians on some of this data in terms of, you know, if people are getting to block sites. So my question is, are they using some of our technology to get to block sites? And we know that they are. The question is just sort of, you know, in what way. It's a cat and mouse game to get around the censors. We also have initiated in my time on the board a new office that's been going through, and clearly Vietnam's at the top of the list given the, you know, two people on average that use 1.96 cell phones. Like, that's where the business is going. So, you know, we're trying to position, you know, we have primarily a radio strategy, or we've had a radio legacy strategy, and we're trying to mix them both in. So clearly search engine optimization is key. Clearly it's a cat and mouse game, you know, with the censors in countries like Vietnam, China, places like that. But these tools, while they originally were intended for, you know, China and Iran and other places, have applications in other spots. So, you know, the board is trying to move resources more quickly to those where we can find cost savings and move them into this kind of effort, because that's clearly, you know, it's a pretty easy path to read here, right? This is the path we're going to be on. You know, our target audience is using these tools to communicate. We need to move there faster. So somebody else can give you, I don't know exactly where we are in Vietnam on the search engine optimization side, but it's definitely part of Rob Bull and his team's efforts to work with all of our companies to have that be part of all of their platforms.
Michael mentioned the Open Technology Fund. I think it's important. We have done some studies on web censorship, and certainly compared to China, China has its own alternate everything for the internet, and Vietnam is not quite in that world, which gives us a few more openings in Vietnam than we have, makes it a little bit less challenging in Vietnam than in China.
Just mentioned, according to our web numbers, for all of our Chinese websites, they are blocked by the Chinese government, but Vietnamese site is not blocked by the Vietnamese government. Most of the time, the past few months, they were blocked for a while, but they were back to normal now.
There's also geographic differences in blocking, too.
Yeah.
In some areas and some internet providers, it's easier to get on than in other areas and with other internet providers.
Next question. Right here, Stephanie.
Hi, my name is Supat with my service, Digital Media Coordinator. I can just answer the question of, my Vietnamese colleagues are not here, but since I work with them, I can answer about the search engine optimization a little bit. I think it's part of their strategy for a long time, the search engine optimization, especially compared to us, because the Vietnamese is in Latin font, so that was always available, versus for us, we haven't strategized that on Google as much because the Khmer font is not there. So from my understanding, it's part of their core strategy already. I have another question about, I understand there is a recent decree that says people cannot share news on social media. And if you could talk more about that and sort of what you see as the long-term policy, you know, and issues relating to internet censorship in Vietnam going forward?
Betsy, you want to?
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up. I can tell you that people are cautious about sharing news on social media to begin with. That it is something that, you know, Facebook, even folks who access sites and are very actively interested in censored news are more cautious when it comes to social media. But obviously, they're being very proactive and in cracking down when people do that. I think that they're fighting against a very difficult tide, and maybe they're hoping to nip it a little bit in the bud because it hasn't quite taken off as a real way of sharing news. I can also say that sharing of links in the past has been seen as a little bit less sensitive than actually writing about something. You know, blogging is a very dangerous thing to do on hard news or censored news. It's a very dangerous thing to do, but sometimes people believe that sharing links is somewhat less of a sensitive thing to do. It's not good, though. I mean, this is part of the reason in the conclusion we did not say there's been big changes in media freedom. I think you'll see all the media indexes will confirm that Vietnam is still in a very tightly controlled situation.
Next question. Right here in front.
Hi, my name is Cornelius Kremen. I work at the Department of State's International Information Programs. I had a question on mobile use. Are Vietnamese seeking the same kind of content on mobile internet? And do they also see the same kind of blockage when they're making their searches? Thanks.
I didn't quite hear that question.
I think he said the Vietnamese were seeing the same kind of content on Google and also
On mobile, right? On mobile, and same kind of blockage on mobile. Yeah.
Yes, they are.
So what are they looking for in using their mobile phones, and are they
Well,
experiencing
I
any
mean,
blocking?
what I'm interested in following a little bit more closely are not, I mean, mobile phones are obviously hugely important, but of course, news seeking on mobile, as we all know, is not as convenient. And, you know, we are reformatting things for mobile because of that. The screens are smaller. I know that the last time we did a qualitative project, which was a while ago, people said, you know, when they're looking for news, they, especially censored news, they consider that a rather serious activity that they prefer to do on a full-size computer. In terms of what types of news they do get, it's sort of like, oh, stuff they need for their business, like what's the cost of this, or what's the supply of that. It tends to be things that are more urgent. Of course, it's expensive sometimes to use mobile for web-based stuff.
We're doing a lot of SMS texting. So a lot of little tiny news bites, or sending notes to each other in little tiny news bites, more than only a quarter of them. If you look back to slide 37,
Right.
less than a quarter, 20%, I think, are actually accessing the internet on their mobile.
Yeah, but even when they access it, it's going to be for stuff that they might need, in terms of news content, stuff they might need for their business or urgent information. I'm very interested in watching growth in tablets. I mean, tablets are still pretty low ownership, but they offer a lot of the attractiveness and mobility that you have on a mobile phone. But you know, a larger screen gives you more ability to do things. So full-size tablets and also mini tablets are really interesting to us.
But give us your card, and we can break out more precisely for you, looking strictly at mobile use by whatever demographic group, whatever variable, including what news sources people are checking on mobile. So we can break that information out for you more particularly. And it addresses the need for a mobile strategy versus a radio strategy versus a TV strategy, which is true for all of these markets, right? There are multiple platforms, multiple strategies, different target audiences, different user groups, and all of that makes the work we do, of course, increasingly complex.
Next question. Okay.
Right on time.
I'd like to once again highlight the January event on Russia. Stay tuned on the actual date of the event. It'll probably be in the latter half of January here in the Great Hall. Let's give one final round of applause to our presenters today, and thank you all for coming.